Senator Sinema, thank you very much. I do look forward to working with you during this session, and I know your work ethic and the things that you take on, and so I'm grateful to be able to serve alongside of you in this conversation and to be able to try to find the areas where we have of common ground on this. I know this will be the first of many uh, committee hearings dealing with this issue of border management, which is an essential part of our subcommittee responsibility. For the witnesses that are here, thank you very much for coming well prepared for your prior statements that you have submitted. We appreciate your engagement today. There's a lot that we need to be able to cover. March 2021 Southwest Land Border Encounters Report from U.S. Customs and Border Protection paints a pretty alarming picture of the crisis that's happening on our southern border. CBP encountered more than 172,000 migrants in the month of March alone. That is nearly 570,000 migrants just this fiscal year. To put that in perspective, that is larger than the entire population of the city of Tulsa in my home state of Oklahoma that have come across our border just this year. Preliminary data for 2021 that has come in shows that we're continuing to see a surge of migrants coming across our border. In fact, if you compare the first 3 weeks of this year to the first 3 weeks of the previous 3 years, 2020, 2020, 2019, and 2018, we've had more encounters in April, just this April, than we've had in the previous 3 years of April combined. This year, there's also been more than 5,000 encounters with aliens coming across the border with a criminal record in the United States. The number of unaccompanied children crossing our border is currently on track to reach a 20-year high. March of 2021, CBP apprehended nearly 19,000 unaccompanied children. This is a historic surge of UACs. It's straining the resources of CBP and the Office of Refugee Resettlement at an alarming rate. The non-governmental organizations appearing today are working hard alongside our government to address this crisis. Many of the advocates working with these NGOs are living out their faith and providing food and shelter to the most vulnerable. Well, I'm grateful for the NGOs, the churches, religious communities, and many other people in every single town and community along the border that are walking alongside these individuals. I'm concerned about the series of policy decisions that still need to be made and some of the decisions that were made at the White House that actually have led to this crisis. President Biden, on the first day of his administration, began rolling back many of the policies of President Trump that he had put in place when we faced a similar surge in 2019, only a smaller surge, even than what we're facing now. These policies that were put in place by the previous administration strengthened our security, stabilized our border. Policies that now enrich the human trafficking cartels are beginning to rise again, and it's putting thousands of people in danger. I took trips to the southwest border during the 2019 crisis as well, because we had also worked on this issue at that time as well, and during the ongoing crisis this year. In fact, I went to the Donna, Texas facility that's so well known now from housing so many unaccompanied minors, and was there in 2019 and there in 2021. And I could tell you, I was shocked to be able to see the difference between the two. Let me show you a picture of what this facility looked like in 2019 and what it looks like in 2021. The stark difference between the two is pretty remarkable. In 2019, they were housing unaccompanied minors. They were moving their way through. There was space in that facility. 2021, that facility, one of the rooms that I was in that's designed to hold 80 people, and as I saw it in 2019, did hold 80 people, that's designed for 80 people was actually holding 709 people. And in that particular facility, some of those individuals had been there more than 10 days in that small crowded space with 709 people in a facility designed for 80. Problems leading to this crisis are complex. We understand that. Cartel violence, human trafficking, smuggling, narcotics trade, depressed economies, coronavirus pandemic, slow economic growth in the Northern Triangle countries, they all lead to this situation. But it's not just the Northern Triangle. As I visited with Border Patrol agents along our southwest border just a few weeks ago and asked, how many countries have we encountered this fiscal year? The answer I got was more than 100 different countries have been encountered this year coming across our southwest border. It's incredibly complicated, and our border has become so porous and open at this point that we're seeing people literally from all over the world that are now crossing that border. Addressing these problems will require a whole of government approach. We have to build capacity to be able to strengthen our regional security, to disrupt transnational criminal organizations that fuel this violence, strengthen our border security, and provide for some smart reforms in how we're going to handle our immigration laws. It's significant that we take this on. The current asylum system is not working the way that it's set up, and it's become an incentive. Currently, if you're an individual coming across our southwest border today, you will be given a notice to appear if you request an asylum hearing, which most everyone does. The current date on the notice to appear that you will have to appear before federal authorities, and it would be your first encounter with the federal authorities since you leave the border, is May the 22nd, 2024, 3 years from now. This Congress, I look forward to working with Senator Sinema and my colleagues to strengthen our border security, to ensure we have a better enforcement, to be able to work through constructive solutions, to be able to fix our broken asylum system and our immigration laws. And I look forward to beginning that dialogue even today. Senator Sinema, thank you for this, calling this hearing, and I look forward to a good dialogue today. Thanks again to our witnesses that are here today. This is a very serious issue that several of you have talked about. 172,000 encounters last month, 172,000 in climbing. This month, 19,000 unaccompanied children. In March, we'll be at that number again in April. Those two numbers are record highs for the last 20 years. We are seeing something very unique at this point. We're well over 1 million people in the asylum backlog. And as I mentioned before, we're 3 years deep before people will actually get to a court hearing. So as of the end of February, the next date that was available was May the 22nd, 2024, to be able to get an asylum hearing, which is very difficult for those who have a legitimate asylum claim, because we have so many people that are coming through that will not have a legitimate asylum claim. In addition to that, we're still dealing with, excuse me, some of the challenges on the border fencing itself. And as I've talked to Border Patrol in Arizona, as I was down in the Tucson sector not long ago and got a chance to be able to see some of the fencing that is not complete there, that on January the 20th, they just stopped construction, leaving large gaps in the system. That helps direct, when we have gaps in the wall, obviously it directs people to illegally cross in those gaps. And those gaps still remain still today because construction on the wall just stopped on January the 20th. When I've talked to Border Patrol, CBP over and over again, they said they'd much rather deal with people coming to the ports of entry to be able to encounter than going through the desert where it makes it even more difficult, or trying to be able to cross in other areas that are more remote. Allowing the fencing to be up directs individuals to other places on the whole, and makes it much easier for them to be able to actually engage with those individuals in a more humanitarian way in the process. So all these things all matter as it all works together in a consistent system on this. Ms. Strano, let me ask you a quick question on this. The funding that you receive, is it all donations? Is it all volunteers? Do you have a federal contract?
We do not have a federal contract. As of now, there's no federal funding for asylum seeker services, which is something that I think should be examined to create this kind of consistent process that everybody is seeking, a safe and orderly process. All of our funding comes from private sources at this point.
At this point for you and your organization, are you gearing up more staff? Are you gearing up more facilities? How are you managing? What do you see on the future at this point, and how your organization is trying to prepare for the future?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Senator. So we actually began in November speaking directly with the local ICE offices and CBP offices around what they were anticipating for increases. We began to expand capacity as a community. We worked closely with collaborative community partners. So we were able to expand our capacity at the Welcome Center, build a plan for folks to quarantine within the Maricopa County system, and we are continuing to scale up in case that there's increase in arrivals further than where we've already been seeing. But we have seen the biggest numbers we've seen since we opened. We are fortunate, though, in adding more staff and having existing systems that are working to be able to process more people as more folks come through, and to make sure that folks are getting informed health information about their COVID status, what their choices are. 100% of the folks that we've encountered and tested found to be positive, we've moved to quarantine hotels voluntarily.
But the individuals that are coming to you in Phoenix, are these folks that are being delivered to you by Border Patrol, or how are they coming to you?
So we receive folks directly from the Yuma port of entry, which is currently the busiest port of entry in Arizona, the sixth. And they are being delivered primarily by ICE. CBP does their processing. ICE transports folks up to the Phoenix area. They process them into a program called Alternatives to Detention, which means that they do have a check-in within 10 or 15 days with immigration and will have many throughout the course of their legal process prior to their court date. So these folks are all arriving with a legal process and paperwork. Sometimes they didn't quite understand it, so we go through it again with them to make sure they can successfully participate in that process.
But they're departing from you within 72 hours at that point.
Generally, unless they're in quarantine, of course, which is a 10-day process.
And then the next time that they'll check in basically would be, most of these would be family units of some type. Most of the time they would check in next with ICE in their hearing for their notice to appear 2 to 3 years in the future.
No, the next time they'll check in with ICE is usually about 15 days after we've received them. They're in the alternative to detention program is currently set up very similar to parole type programs where they have regular check-ins, they provide updates, immigration checks in on where they're living, things like that. They do usually have at least one adult in the household has an ankle monitor at this time, or they have a SmartLink GPS phone that tracks their movements. So they actually are staying in very close contact with immigration throughout that process.
Okay. Most of the individuals then coming to you have an ankle monitor or some kind of link at that point when they come to you.
That's accurate.
Okay. Let me ask about Mr. Jones about how do we disrupt the flow of drugs coming across the border? As Senator Johnson had mentioned before, one of the big pull factors that are coming into the country and one of the major issues for Central America is the flow of drugs into our country. Many of the individuals that I've encountered, I've been in the Arizona border recently, I've been in the Texas border twice in the past month to get a chance to be able to get an inspection of what's actually happening on site. The most common things that I hear are obviously fear of what's happening in Central America for them. Economic opportunity is a big issue. Almost everyone is coming because they've got a relative that has a job for them. And then the biggest issue for all of them is that they have a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, an uncle, an aunt, someone that's already living here in the country, most of those not legally present as well. And they're coming to re-engage with their family that's been here in the United States for a while. And they're just reconnecting their family units here. Much of this, though, has to deal with some of the push out of the Central America, dealing with what's happening with drugs there and some of the gangs. What can we do in the United States from what you have seen to be able to deal with some of those issues on how we can deal with the drug problem?
Thank you, Senator. In terms of drugs moving across the border as opposed to people moving across the border, when we get west of the Rio Grande Valley, in other words, in the New Mexico, Arizona, and the California border, most drugs are crossed either through tunnels or directly through the port, particularly the port at San Ysidro is the largest land port in the Western Hemisphere. And a significant quantity of drugs entering the United States just come straight through the lanes in that port. Sinaloa cartel pioneered the use of tunnels to move drugs into the U.S. A good tunnel can go a long way for them in terms of freely moving drugs across the border. In the Rio Grande Valley, which is the entire Texas border, most drugs and people just straight across the river is extraordinarily difficult to police from a CBP standpoint. I think in terms of what we can do from a law enforcement standpoint to help is focus on technology. Technology to detect tunnels, technology to figure a way to account for the fact that it's very difficult to build a wall in a river valley here in Texas. And aside from and separate from that, to account for the fact that sometimes in these ports where drugs are being moved across is because of a CBP guy or CBP personnel being bought off by drug cartels. So there's some corruption issues on our end there at the ports as well.
Senator Sinema, may I ask one more question?
Of course.
Mr. Jones, let me ask as well. Thank you, by the way, Senator Sinema. The Trump administration put in place a policy where they're working with the Mexican government that they would add additional National Guard to their southern border with Guatemala, and then with the Guatemalan government to also enforce their border with Honduras and to be able to turn more people around. The Biden administration, according to public reports, have also engaged now in the last month through that same policy, working with the Mexican government to be able to enforce their southern border, working with the government of Guatemala to be able to turn people around. I've had some conversations with leadership in the Guatemalan government. They have repeated that same statement to me that they've worked with the Biden administration to start actively turning people around in Guatemala so that they're not coming through Guatemala. Tell me about that policy. Is that an effective policy? Is that a tool in the toolbox that should be used?
Well, I think the experience of the Trump administration's efforts in those areas show that it does work. There was, of course, the immigration spike around 2018, 2019, and a lot of those policies went into effect after that, and we saw the numbers come down. If Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador are enforcing their own borders, I think that is going to go a long way in terms of minimizing the numbers of migrants coming up to the United States. And I suspect it's going to work in this case as well. Biden administration has pursued that with Mexico.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Sinema. I would say in meeting with Border Patrol and CBP, they are very concerned that Title 42 authority will go away. And if that goes away, what will happen in the acceleration of additional individuals coming across the border? When I've spoken to Border Patrol and CBP, they've brought that up over and over and over again, saying we have this incredible rush at the border right now. If Title 42 authority goes away, that rush is going to accelerate to a whole different level. And it will move from unmanageable to really, really unmanageable at that point. So it'll be interesting to be able to see the decision that President Biden and his team make on how they're going to enforce the border and what that actually looks like for them. Ms. Toronto, I do want to ask you about the asylum process and what's going on and the challenge of this. You're trying to explain the asylum process to individuals that are obviously not familiar with our laws. They've been told by the cartels that are actually moving them through Mexico or the smugglers, here's what to say when you get there. And it's interesting, when I visited with children at the border and talked to families at the border and asked them, why did you come right now? I get the exact same answer from each person. It's dangerous in my country. And it's always that sentence and they stop. And so it's been very interesting just to be able to visit with people. So it's clear they've been coached and know exactly what to be able to say at that point. But when they get to you, it's different. You're trying to help them know kind of what the next step, what actually happens at this point. The backlog of over 1 million people, the very long delay for an asylum hearing, what effect does that have, and how do you explain that to people that you interact with?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question, Senator. You're correct. Our point that we're encountering people, we're not talking to them about the veracity of their case or the basis of their case. We're talking to them about the next steps to make sure they're informed, that they can participate in the process. I will say that a very important aspect of an asylum case is the presentation of country conditions reports. And those reports are used to present what are the risks of violence and persecution that this person is facing back in their country. And there are some fairly substantial, information about the risks they're facing. For instance, femicides in Honduras. Very important information that when people say they're fleeing danger, there's a lot to back that up. Winning their individual cases is, of course, a different matter entirely. And a lot of it has to do with their access to legal resources and determinative of their outcomes. What we are offering and counting at this point is that folks have had their information explained to them in a cursory way or not in their native language. And so we're making sure they understand about their check-ins, that they understand that their court date is coming. And I absolutely agree with you that that prolonged period between the time that they cross and the time of their court date is against all of our shared goals. I think it is more humane to get them to that court process much sooner, because it is a very bad flex situation to be put in, to be in the country seeking legal protection, but to not have a determination of whether you have legal protection or not yet. So I would definitely advocate for adding more immigration justice judges, increasing the docket size, and making sure also that there's more access to the types of legal resources that help the asylum seekers understand that process and successfully participate in it. We are in agreement about the length of time being too far, and a lot of that does have to do with dockets that backed up because of the delays caused by some of these processes, such as MPP, such as Title 42. there is a docket backup as a result. But I do think it would be addressed with more judges.
Yeah, the docket's actually very old and continues to be able to just grow. And obviously, with so many people that we've encountered just in the last couple of months, it's accelerated dramatically to be able to get that number in. You had mentioned, I think, a number earlier, how many countries that you have encountered just this year. How many countries have you encountered at your facility there in Phoenix?
We have encountered folks from 43 different countries this year, although we are primarily seeing folks that are not eligible for Title 42 expulsion. And so those are people from further away distances. Our primary countries are Cuba, Brazil, Haiti, Romania, China, India. Most of the folks from Mexico and Central America are still currently being subjected to expulsion under Title 42.
Okay, all right, that's very helpful. Sheriff Sinema, thanks. Thanks for allowing me to be able to drop a couple of the questions in. I know that we have a vote that is ongoing at this point, so I'll reserve my other questions for the record.